All right, question time. Who wants to start?
Would you like me to start? Okay. I have a question on, thank you for your presentation, and I have a question on your property value assessment. I noted in the sites that you selected, I appreciate the 14% validity to, I think 10% is around a threshold, so you were over that, which is great. But my question was, what was the distance to the closest residence in each of those sites? The Hearthside, the Mountain Falls, and the Bellaterra, since those were the ones that had the percentage enough in the survey to be included.
I did not do the distance measurement.
Okay. Thank you.
Just keep going.
The feedback is.
Yeah.
It is difficult.
Yes. If anyone else has questions, that was my first, so.
Yes. Anybody else got a question?
thought she had
John,
more.
Dave?
Oh, she had more?
Well, yeah, but she doesn't want to take them all at one time.
Oh.
Unless there's no others. I don't know.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Go ahead.
So this relates as well, but in the areas that you studied for property value, were they a tourist destination based on a natural resource as the attraction of the tourist destination?
They were a tourist destination in all of them except California, and
Okay.
California is more of a destination, not so much like a beach or some type of natural resource.
Okay, and then I was just trying to compare them to areas here. It seemed that in the, let me go back for a minute. In the, maybe it was the Mountain Falls, there was definitely, sorry, I need to pull out my notes real quick. Heavily forested areas near there. You pointed out a residential area in the slide, but it looked like maybe 20 acres. It was really hard to tell in your presentation, the distance and the area surrounding these and how it's comparative if the maps aren't to the same scale. So that was a question of the distance to residents, but also the forested area around the sides of those in comparison to this project, as well as industrial, commercial surrounding properties, which this one is completely surrounded by residential property besides the park. So just if you have any other information on that.
Certainly. On the Mountain Falls one, if you would look at the topography there, you'll notice that the residences going from the east are at a higher elevation, so they do have a view. The residences that would be to the south, there is some woods in between there. I would doubt if they do have a clear view. And of course, further down on the road by the highway, there is commercial properties at that point. But then across the street, you do have more residential, more recreationally type of oriented because of the lakes.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. I need a minute, so if
Oh,
anyone else has
okay.
questions, please.
I've got one.
Thank you.
Your holding tanks. How often do the trucks run?
So, talking with septic maintenance, we'll do that. When we're full, when all 117 are there, we'd have 2 loads a day. If it's completely built out based on my calculations. Septic maintenance said that they would have it in their schedule similar to what they do for Westwood Shores, so you know it's empty Friday afternoon and has capacity, and then they show up Monday morning. They also do have Saturday service for emergencies, so we feel we are covered. Tony even mentioned that they're going to start getting into where you can have a monitoring device in there that would relay back to their office that the tank's half full or whatever, so they would keep tabs on that.
Okay. Anybody else got a question?
Yes. The septic tank sizing, I'm looking at 117 RV units, and the calculation was 2.5 bedrooms. I don't know how it's done normally. I always thought it was based on the actual number of bedrooms. So if you have a potential of a house of 2 to 3 bedrooms and an RV and whatever its associated bedrooms are, why at 2.5 bedrooms?
Right. So the way we do it in our industry, so I do quite a few large-scale wastewater systems. So, for example, I did one 2 or 3 months ago it was built 2 or 3 months ago in Eau Claire County that was for 41 homes. So what you do is you can take meter data from residential uses, and based on, I believe it was 296 homes metered in that area, we came up with 41.5 gallons per day per bedroom is the rate. So we can use some of that meter data as far as our DSPS approval. You know, certainly if DSPS or this board says double your holding tank volume and we feel better about it, that's a viable condition that we'd be happy to do. I feel the tank is adequately sized. The benefit of having a tank, you know, in this scenario, the tanker, you're at the mercy of the tanker truck. So whether you have a 40,000 gallon tank or an 80,000 gallon tank, you're at the mercy of that guy showing up when it's approaching its full level, and that's why you have a contract with a company like we will. The benefit of having a smaller tank, one benefit is we've had situations in other places where if the tanks are too large and the wastewater gets stagnant, it turns septic, and that's when you get more odors. So if you're turning it over and getting rid of it, and new comes in, get rid of it, new comes in, it helps some of that thing, some of those instances. But yeah, I guess great question that if more tank volume is a condition you want to place on here, we'd certainly do that.
On the trucks themselves, some of the problems we've had in the past has been the use of the vacuum pump on the trucks and the noise that's involved there. You're stating that your tanks are going to have pumps built into the tanks with no intentions of the vacuum pumps being used?
Yeah, I'll have Tom. Tom used to own a tanker business, so I'll have him talk about that.
That's why he's familiar.
Back in a previous life, I owned Royal Flush.
I was trying to figure out why you looked familiar.
And actually, I just spoke with Tony Gosser today, who has septic maintenance. The way that their system works, their pumps are driven, first off, they're impeller pumps, not vacuum. When you have a vacuum pump, which is on the smaller straight trucks typically, not a semi-tractor trailer, you have to evacuate all of the air out of the tank literally by volume multiple times in order to create a vacuum. In this case, it's a completely opposite situation. You're actually pushing water into the tank. There is no vacuum. And what you're doing is displacing the air that's in the tank. So you take water out of the tank that's in the ground. We'll have a booster pump as well as the pump on the truck. The pumps on the truck are run by a power takeoff. So the truck sits there at idle or just a little above idle to create the necessary hydraulic pressure that you need to run the pumps. The fact that we have a pump in the tank means that it will go much faster. The trucks will load in probably about 10 minutes. The vapor that comes out of the truck, as the water goes in, the air is displaced. The vapor that comes out will be funneled through a vapor recovery system back into the tank vent. So the air pressure and the water pressure will always balance each other. The net result is you've captured basically all the vapor. So there should be very little smell. That has not been done on the tanks that I'm aware of in Westwood Shores and Bay Shore Inn. Yeah. So does that help?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
There hasn't been any comment, most municipal water systems have a storage capacity that if the power goes out, they're not actually running off a pump system, it's all gravity feed. You'll be running off a well system. Are you going to end up with generators in the system? Is there generators for the pumping of that tank, or?
Yeah, one thing there will not need to be, and the reason for that is if the electricity goes out, then you can't use your well pump's not going to kick on. You're only going to be using the water that's in the lines basically in your home, so you wouldn't have a risk of electricity's out, water's continue to run and tank's full and we don't know about it because of the alarm. So if electricity's out, well doesn't run, that's basically the safeguard. I would rather have that happen than have a generator, have the wells continue running, but yet your holding tank pump thing is out of electricity and you don't know it's getting full. So I think that's kind of the balance there.
Trucks can pull without that too, without that pump, yeah.
Okay. Your typical lot example, house lot, is basically a square rectangular lot. Clearly, you're not going to have rectangular lots around the entire development. So what's the narrowest lot frontage that you're going to end up with?
Yeah, we'll need to take a look at the plan there if we want to get that detail on that. I don't know if we can,
Page 16 does a better job.
The applicant has the paper documents and a scale if you want to see.
I'll bring it right over there.
Ken, can I ask a follow-up question while they look around for the answer to Dave's?
Sure.
This has to do with, I think, and I might have missed it, but Pete, when you explained how you came up with the gallons per day for the septic system quantity, I think the initial question is, how did you come up with the number of bedrooms per unit in order to come to mathematically get to that? Because
So, being the type of resort that this is, the 2.5 bedrooms includes 1 bedroom in the motor coach, up to 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms in the other, averaging 2.5. Again, not every site's gonna have a house, not every site's gonna have a motor coach. So that's my engineering opinion, that 2.5 is a good average. The good thing about projects like this is you certainly, it's not built in one day, and we're gonna put water meters on everybody's usage. We're gonna track and try to limit the water usage, obviously, because it is on a holding tank to keep costs down. So, yeah, the 2.5 bedrooms, that assumes the same people are using the motor coach and the home, which is, I guess, what I witnessed in the Petoskey development. Getting back to the lot width question, if you look at this map, you know, there's, this 104 looks like one of the narrowest. It's probably 50 feet wide at the divide. 44 at the zoning line where the home would start is 55, close to 60. So the standard on all of these is the 60? Yeah, 60 is the standard, and all these are 60s. A few of those pie-shaped ones get a little bit goofy, but we have 60 at the building setback for the home.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a few with the gallons of use per day, or per minute, sorry. You had 89 gallons per minute. I'm just wondering if you included things like refilling the pool, refilling the stormwater ponds, since if there's a drought, they need to remain at a certain level of water. Irrigation for establishing all the green space that's proposed. Yeah.
Right, so the way the pumps are, we look on a chart and says, based on the number of units involved in the development, it's a probability chart that says not everybody's gonna take a shower at the exact same time, and it gives you that curve and it gives you those values. So again, the 85 gallons a minute out of each well, that's where that came from in the DNR calculation. They actually make you take the amount of gallons anticipated per day, you figure it's all used in an 8-hour period, and then you multiply that by 4 for a peak factor of safety. So that's kind of how you pick those numbers. There's a criteria for that. As far as irrigation, again, we're trying to set this up so that the road, every time it rains, all the water from all the roads ends up in the ponds and hopefully keeps those at a level where we don't have to do much to keep those going. Irrigation-wise, you know, we're going to have to keep an eye on that. Again, this is going to be a controlled community. It's going to be managed. I don't know how best to answer that. If it would become a situation, what we can do, what we've done in the past, is you put in a storage tank and you pump your irrigation out of the storage tank, so you can run your wells in at 20 gallons a minute, fills up the tank. When you need to irrigate, you use the tank to irrigate. So there's options. We haven't, I hope that answers your question.
The other part of that is, are the RVs, when you say they're hooked up, I understand the electrical tower, but are they also getting water from the site to fill
Yes.
their own tanks? And then are they pumping out at their sites or at a site, and how is the pump out happening?
Okay, so there will be no pump out. They'll have a sewerizer. So when it goes out the toilet or the shower in the motor coach, it ends up down here. You don't have to drive away and go to a dump station.
So it's attached right at their
It
RV
is.
site from underground?
Right. Yep, it's just like city sewer, basically. They hook up and they never have to move. You don't have to have tanker trucks. Some campgrounds I've design, that's the way it is. You send the honey wagon out. But in this case, it is just like a municipal sewer.
Yep, go ahead, John.
I guess it's more for Pete probably. Is there any plans in the design for the holding tank? Is something, I'm sorry, people. Is there any plans for mitigation of a spill or a crack in the holding tank? What prevents ground seepage if something like that should happen?
Yeah, so the holding tank itself, like I said, is a precast tanks are what is used in the current industry, and those are better than a lot of the old, obviously better than the steel tanks that were failing. Better than a cast-in-place tank. You got more control, quality control in the factory. It gets set. The pumper keeps track of gallons used. If there would be a fluctuation in that, that's step one to say something's goofy here. There'll be low water alarms in the tank to monitor if something would happen. I know at the Landmark, I'm not sure if it was this committee, but somebody requires yearly inspections of those tanks, and we used to actually do that with a camera down in those tanks. That's a reasonable request to do a yearly inspection on a tank like that. Does that answer your question?
To a degree, is there any kind of system you can place under the tank to mitigate any seepage possible, even slow or otherwise?
I have not heard of such a thing. You know, the tanks are sprayed with a sealant, obviously, but that's standard in all tanks. I don't know if I've ever seen something where you have some kind of a seepage alarm outside of a tank. We'll certainly have these tanks, you know, on proper bedding, and I don't know how to answer that, I guess.
Because some of it I refer to, I'm thinking more like a gas storage tank where there's a concrete pit that they sit in to prevent any gas from leaking into the ground or petroleum products. And my second question to the holding tank is, what if there's a spill from one of the tankers? Let's say a pipe fails and it's going on the ground or however, and I know these may be far-fetched, but these are a lot of questions that have been asked. Is there any ground protection if a tanker should have a leak?
Right, and that is a good question. You know, these tanks are on a large scale, but it's the same as every tank in the county. You know, maybe we could do a drain tile system on the outside of the tank that would take it to an ejector pit that would pump it back up, and if that ejector pit ever works, we knew that there may be a problem, and then we can inspect if it's groundwater or if it's sewage water. You know, that would be the trick on it. You certainly don't want to be pumping groundwater into your holding tank. That would be foolish. But I have never heard of a containment system for a septic holding tank in the years I've been doing this.
And regarding the 40,000 gallon capacity, are there any others in Door County that size?
Yes, I believe, I don't have the exact numbers, but Little Sweden, we'd done that years ago, and that was 2 large tanks. I think that's a total of 40. I think Tony Gosser thought that Westwood Shores was between 30 and 40, so it's not uncommon. Landmark is a cast-in-place tank, which is huge. That's much larger than 40. I think that's 100 and some thousand.
And the life expectancy of one of these tanks?
So the steel tanks most of them in the county have been replaced because after 30 years in the ground, the steel deteriorated and there was definitely leaks. Concrete holding tanks, the good thing about concrete in the concrete industry is things get harder as concrete continues to harden its entire forever. We wouldn't see that this, I don't know what the lifespan is, but it's 100? I don't know. It's a concrete tank. You know, if you do a yearly inspection and show that you not have any kind of crazy unexpected crack line or something, I can't imagine that this tank isn't there forever and usable. It's not like every 20 years you replace concrete tanks. They're there for a long time.
I understand it. I just replaced mine at home, but it's not the same type of system. But it's concrete and it fails.
Okay.
And I guess that's why I'm asking that particular question. I understand they're probably built different and different strengths, But nonetheless, the big concern is the safety factor of seepage into the ground.
Right, and I do think a yearly inspection requirement would satisfy that concern, that the tank is being looked at and we stay on top of anything that looks out of the ordinary.
Thank you.
As far as the groundwater management goes, two parts of this question. Have you or any study you found or known done a project to this scale on top of exposed bedrock?
So, yeah, that's interesting on this site. So, devil's advocate says the entire escarpment's the same, it just has a foot of material over it right now, and you scrape the foot and you build your project. The foot of material is already gone, so it is unique. I did the gas station in Carlsville that was up a couple years ago, and that was an old mine site next door, and boy, we had nothing for topsoil there. So we went through some DNR hurdles there to make sure that if there's a leak, it goes to the line storm area and all that stuff. So it's not uncommon, I guess, to say that development on the escarpment happens. Is it unique that this is a 50-acre former mine site? Yes, it's very unique. The thing I keep going back to is, if this 50-acre mine site, if 5 years ago everybody got together and said, man, that should be reclaimed, that'd be great if that mine was reclaimed, I think we'd be sitting here saying, that was great, somebody put 18 inches of material over the top of this mine. It's so much better, it's growing things, it's not a bare surface. So I think that's the argument we make is, my opinion is that we're certainly getting rid of the exposed rock, and we're adding a filter, we're adding storm ponds, we're adding liners, we're adding things to manage everything and grow vegetation. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It kind of leads to the next part, if you could explain a timeline or stages, because I think what's unique about it is in other situations, you're dealing with a smaller area of disturbance all at one time, where this whole area is already disturbed. So I don't necessarily understand how things like silt fences would work in something like this, because there's nothing to hold them in place because there's nothing there.
Right, so we've had that conversation with the DNR, and that's going to be part of the final plan that they approve. We'll have the straw bale barriers that are weighted down if we can't get stakes and things like that. So we are dealing with that. From a construction standpoint, we laid out some timelines, and we feel that an appropriate time from start to mass grading done, ponds in, sewer and water in, roads built, done, we think an eight-month construction schedule is doable. And, certainly if the concern of the committee is that this thing drags on too long, if you want to limit site utility work and blasting and nuisance to 8 months, I think we can make that work.
Biz?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have to speak into this so that the public can hear. As long as we were talking about the holding tanks, I think you said that the hauler, his trucks could hold 7,000 gallons?
Right, I think he said he's got a 8,000-gallon tank. Legally, he can haul around 7 with weight limits.
So it's going to take 2 loads per day?
What if the project's completely built out and it's full in summer? Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, they're going to be there often,
Right.
Okay. In regards to the 2 wells, will there be like a small house there or something for a pressure system?
Right, yeah, each well will have a 10-by-10 well house is what we have planned, and I believe each one has 300 gallons or so of pressure tank to equal out. The way they do these wells now is on a variable frequency drive pump, so if you only need 10 gallons a minute because hardly any water is being used, it doesn't ramp all the way up and pump the full 85 gallons a minute. It ramps up as demand dictates. So when we say we have two 85 gallon per minute wells, that would be complex is full, very busy time, everybody's using their water, the most it would pump would be that.
Yeah, because I think the motorhomes have their own pressure system as well, huh? So the water gets to their supply, their pressure system, and then they...
Right, and we will have pressure throughout the system, the way it's designed. We do a calculation on friction loss in the water mains, and we have to do a private water main submittal to to the DSPS that actually shows that we can maintain 20 PSI at every site so that you have adequate service to every site. So I don't own a motor coach, but I do use campers, and when you hook up to a water system at a public campground, the pressure of the water service is filling your individual camper. It'd be the same situation. I don't see that every motor coach is going to have any kind of a booster pump requirement. If they hook up to our system, it's going to have the same pressure as the water going into a house.
Okay, thank you. Is there going to be sidewalks throughout the park for the public to get to different, like to the pickleball, to the clubhouse? Or do they walk on the edge of the street, or how?
Right. So it'll be very similar to the video we saw in Petoskey. It'll simply be the walk on the road, and it is it's a private community. It's not a thoroughfare. We don't feel there's any need to put a separate sidewalk in besides just utilizing the road itself.
Okay, and you said there'll be no overhead lights, so I would expect that everything is going to be buried underground?
Right. All utilities will be buried. And when I talked about the overhead lights, there'll be no street lighting. So I know the concern was off-site. So we'll have lighting on the houses themselves, your porch light, but you're not going to have lighting for the larger road areas. That was what I was getting at.
Okay. How in the winter will the snow plowing be handled, and because of the area, they're going to use salt on the roads, and this is all runoff is going to go to the pond?
Right. So this is a private road, so there'll be a private contractor that takes care of all the plowing. Same as I know Tom's involved with North Haven. That's what they do. And yeah, the roads will be plowed. Any runoff from the road or driveway areas ends up in the pond, direct conduit, using the curb and gutter system. So we feel that's the best way to go about it.
And then as far as garbage goes, each owner, will they be required to carry their garbage to this house that houses the dumpsters?
Right. Yes, that's the way they do it at North Haven, and it seems to be working.
I guess I'd just like to hit a little bit on, you say that the area was inspected and there's no sinkholes, but we understand this, it's a karst area. I mean, when you look at the side of the wall, it's all cracks. I mean, it's a karst area. So any contaminations, whether it's lawn fertilizer or whatever, is going to go down into the table. I want to use an example, a business that we had years ago that had a failing system. And they put dye in the toilets. And I can tell you, that dye showed up miles away and nothing flat. So because it's a karst area, and it's a unique area, it's an old quarry, any contamination that's created, whether it's salt or any kind of fertilizers or anything that gets into that karst area, it can get down into the ground table. And I suspect there's going to be landscaping, shrubbery, lawns, flowers. So is there going to be any restrictions at all on what people can do in the park?
Yes, there will be restrictions on the type of fertilizers used. I'm not a landscaper, but we can certainly specify organic fertilizers or whatever the requirement is. Again, I think we're taking this project, which we're going to provide an average of 18 inches of filter material over something that has none right now. I think we're doing some good by doing that. I think we're doing some good by establishing vegetation. I think we're doing all the safeguards we can by having the roads directly connected to the ponds. I think we're putting in all the above and beyond the normal liner type. I think we're doing our due diligence to make this as safe environmentally as is reasonable and as practical to allow this development without impact to the environment. You do need to compare this to other areas. I've had this argument with the DNR. We wanted to put a car wash in and put it on a septic system, and they said we could not. And they said, that's just a state law. you're gonna have road salts and things coming off the cars, and you're gonna put that into a septic system, and it's gonna pollute the air or the water. You know, it's an interesting discussion because 100 feet from where I was gonna put the car wash, there's a road ditch that's right on bedrock, and you can see the bedrock, and plows go and push the salt in the ditch, and you know, where is the line between we're doing practically everything we can to make this safe, and let's ignore the other 99% of the county where they're not doing all these measures. You know, there's many places in the county where you have farm fields on a foot of soil, you have orchards on a foot of soil, you have, Horseshoe Bay is a great example. There's tons of that area that has 6 inches of soil, and they're fertilizing, and they're pumping water, and they're putting roads in and driveways and houses, and it's not an ideal situation, but to look at something like Horseshoe Bay with not having county zoning, not having control, and just go do it, I think, this is the gold standard of, if you're going to do something in a sensitive area, if everybody in the future gets held to this standard, we're doing all we can to make it safe.
What assurance does the public have that this park is going to be well maintained? Because the lots and the homes are privately owned, and
right.
You don't want things to get out of hand, because then it is going to affect the prices of homes in the area if the park isn't really maintained well.
Right. So just like any development, the people who, if you want to buy lot 8, you bought 60 by 150, you have your RV pad you can put in, you have your home you can put in. You're going to have to adhere to the covenants and rules of the homeowners group. So there will be a lot of restrictions. There's going to be quiet hours. There's going to be restrictions on what your type of siding you can use. There's going to be restrictions on pets. There's going to be restrictions on fireworks, all that stuff that could be a nuisance. So the good news is because it goes through this process, and because it's going to be a homeowners association, and because it's, the people involved in the management of this certainly it's going to have the country club feel of, here's all the residents, and we want to keep it nice. Certainly my tour of the one in Petoskey proved to me that it is upscale, and it was well done, and it was well managed, and you certainly didn't drive through there and say this is a nuisance or something's out of control. I'd say there's more control on this than there is in most HOAs, just because you'll have a management team involved.
Okay, thank you, Pete.
Good?
Yeah.
Get some more?
I need a minute, maybe else says any more, but.
Okay. The storm pond lining, I get that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. The liner for the storm pond, I get that, but explain how that's going to be constructed.
Okay, so in this case, the good news is we're going to balance the site from an aggregate standpoint. So DNR code says this pond needs to be 5 feet deep to get our water quality calculations to work. We've designed it to be deeper than that for a couple of reasons. One, it keeps the water cleaner, it looks nicer. And two, we're going to use that material to build the roads, pads for the motor coach pads, and try to balance the site from a standpoint where we don't have to haul all that stuff in. The only thing we can see hauling in would be if there's not enough topsoil that we pull out of this area to top dress this, that you're going to be pulling in, you're going to haul in topsoil to do that. As far as the pond itself is constructed, so you're gonna blast the pond, drill down, blast the pond just like a basement would be done. You're gonna excavate that material out. You're gonna send it through a crusher, process it. You're gonna have breaker run come out of that, which is the bigger material, which goes in the bottom of the road. You're gonna have smaller material, which goes for your pads, and then you're gonna have all the fines that are filtered out as you shake through your different, and those fines can be used for the brick patios and things that'll be built on the site. So it's pretty efficient that we're going to try to generate our own material and use it. But the process is you blast out the pond, you dig all the material out, you process it, you place it where you need to. Then you put down a bedding of the small fines. First you inspect the entire bottom of the pond and you say, okay, is there any cracks here that are a concern that would allow the liner to slough or anything to be a problem? And if there is, there's criteria that there's 3 criteria. If it's a narrow crack, you do this. If it's a little wider, you do this. And if it's a little wider, you do this. So there's a criteria that the county's adopted and we've used in other places that dictates what you do. So you basically assure that you're sealing up any cracks in the bottom of that pond. Then you're placing in the fines and the bedding for underneath the liner. You place a filter fabric over that, and then you place the 60 mil liner. And then that's your surface, and then the pond can fill up, and then anything above the safety ledge up, you can have topsoil come down so you have grass going down to your pond.
Okay, so nothing on top of the filter, the liner.
We have in the past with a 60 mil, there's no need once you get below the water level.
Okay, so
Once you
that's
get
not gonna
below
be
the
a-
safety ledge.
That's gonna be sectioned off somehow, that's not gonna be accessible to, I know it's older people that are coming in there, but they may have some youngsters coming by. That's not gonna be accessible to swimming or anything.
No, there will be no swimming. The way you design a storm pond is this. You design a storm pond so the permanent level is, there's a safety ledge below the permanent level that's 6 inches deep, right at the edge where the permanent pond level would be, and then it's 1.5 feet deep on a 10-to-1 flat slope. So the whole theory on this is if somebody walks along the edge of the pond and falls, they can simply stand up because you have a flat 10-foot area that's only at the most 1.5 feet deep. Once somebody commits and they're wading knee-deep out, well, now they're swimming, and that's why the safety ledge is where it is. It protects the innocent around the edge of the pond. If somebody swims out to the middle, we can't do anything to prevent them, from.
Okay. Are you ready now?
Sure.
Okay.
With the idea of financial assurance, I understand that it's a private property or private project, so it's not impacting the community in that sense, but as far as it being the site that it is, and you made the statement about not needing to do mine reclamation based on the codes that we have for that. And I guess I'm looking at worst case scenario. If you blast everything, the holes are there, the utilities are in, and then you go bankrupt. How is it left after that? What assurance is there or for that? Just in the worst case scenario of that.
Right, and the developer's mindset is obviously that isn't going to happen. They're gonna be pre-approved for a loan. That loan's the investors are gonna commit to the millions of dollars to build this thing, and then you start the project. So it's not, the risk of that, in my mind, is not a risk in this situation. Again, day one, we're doing mass site grading on this entire thing. We're getting the ponds in, we're getting the sewer water in, we're getting the road at a gradual slope up. The sequencing of this would be, if no lots sell, they're gonna have the investors to do the construction. If no lots sell, the construction's gonna be done. If for some reason it goes terribly, you're gonna end up with a site that has average of 18 inches of material, topsoil within 20 feet of all the roads with green grass, topsoil all the way around the ponds, and a road that's manageable to get up there. It certainly would be much better than what we see today. Now, doomsday prediction that you're gonna blast out and dig 10-foot hole and then you're gonna leave, I don't see that is realistic. Mining reclamation, I do mining reclamation plans in the county here, and basically they have a formula that says set aside enough money that either you have enough topsoil on site to put 4 inches over the whole thing, or do a letter of credit that says there's 20 grand sitting in a letter of credit that if they default, you have 20 grand to put the topsoil down, the county would. So, something reasonable like that. I don't see if that's a deal breaker, we can certainly work with that. To say we need a $5 million letter of credit, I think is a little extreme. I think if you say there's $100,000 worth of topsoil work to clean this up if somebody walks away tomorrow, I think that's, obviously something that you could make a condition, and I convince these guys that's a good idea.
Which kind of leads to the question about timeline again. In the proposal, it mentioned a 10-year possible build-out to the complete. So does that mean that you would be covering everything with topsoil and then removing it to build homes or put in RV spots? Or are those going in all, not the homes, but the RV spots and all the roads right away?
Right. So the
In the
plan
8
is, and
months.
this is part of the DNR plan, we put in the road, we put in 20 feet of topsoil behind both curbs. and that has to be seeded and topsoiled like grass. Anything within 20 feet of the top slope of the ponds have to be completed with grass. The area that you're gonna end up building your house and the motor coach pad, that would be left with fill. It'd be filled, but it just wouldn't be top dressed and seeded because you don't wanna, it's defeating you're digging it up and all that. So if certainly they're gonna, as they sell lots, you'll clean it up. If the developer finds from a marketing standpoint that everything needs to be green, they're gonna topsoil the whole thing. My opinion is, I wouldn't topsoil where you're gonna go dig it right back up a year later, but maybe they would.
It brings me to the question about dust mitigation for, up to 10 years where it just has subfill in an area that has no vegetation around it other than what you just described, plus the number that may sell each year. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And if a condition of this committee is you need to seed everything within a year of getting the roads done, I think they might kill me, but I could live with that.
Okay. John, any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
On the pond issues again, I guess, Pete, I'm sorry, here we go. What is the holding capacity of those ponds, gallon-wise?
Renee, can you find that?
And then what is the depth of the biggest pond that you have there?
Yeah, I believe the deepest pond we have is pushing 20 feet of depth. Do you have the total gallonage, Renee? Or the total cubic feet, I guess? Yeah. Okay, so pond A is the big one. Total storage would be 601,000 cubic feet.
I think it's 2.8 million gallons. I used the numbers to take the cubic feet.
No, I'm sorry.
The storage in pond B would be 138,000 cubic feet, and pond C would be 69,000 cubic feet roughly. So if we add all those up and multiply by 7.48, I believe it is, that would give you the gallons. I might have a calculator. So,
Okay, with that in mind, going to the fire department and their approval of the project itself, they plan on using that water for fire suppression? And you mentioned the dry hydrant. How deep does that dry hydrant have to go in the winter for freeze over? And they would still be able to use the ponds?
right, so when you place a dry hydrant, you make sure it's below ice level, but you also want to keep it a few feet off the bottom so it's not taking in anything from the bottom that settles in the bottom of the pond. So typically we see those dry hydrants, I think I had a detail, I think they're about 6 feet below top of pond, maybe it was where it would enter the pond, and that would be in the free zone that's free of the settled solids and free of the ice.
Are those designed based on the NFPA standards?
Yes, we did the exact same one at the Bug Fire Department when they built their station recently. We had one of those implemented.
Okay. Is there any plan for a dry hydrant, let's say in the county's Penny Park there?
No plan as part of this project. I think the fire chief was thrilled to have this opportunity. But certainly that's an option for the county if that would be easy to implement through that wall.
And still relating to the fire department, is that able to be used by the fire department for fire suppression in the neighborhood?
Yes, absolutely.
Gated access how?
And is this a gated access to this area?
Right, so we call it a gated community. The one in Petoskey has the arm gate. The final design of how that arm gate or gated deal is going to work, we're anticipating here people are going to drive all the way to the top to the project to check in. I don't think we need a gate itself, which then again helps if you have a fire department access, they can just have free reign getting in there.
I understand that. When it comes to an emergency, if it's got a gate, are we providing assurances to not just the fire department, law enforcement, ambulance service, They either have to have an access code or a fob or
Right.
however it works, a Knox box.
Right, so they're whispering in my ear here that they are breakaway gates. If they'd have to drive through them, it would certainly be accessible to the fire department at any time.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Oh, you good now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Biz, any questions?
No, I'm okay right now.
Dave?
Can you walk us through, is that working?
I think so.
Yep, it is.
Ownership of, how somebody goes about purchasing a lot, and what they get when they purchase a lot. What kind of ownership it is.
We worked with the county on that to make sure that we were consistent with the, you know, that our ownership structure tied into or did not run afoul of the way the zoning is working. In this particular case, you have the common area, which would be the roads and the ponds and the pavilion center and all those kinds of things. That is all held in common. When you buy the tract, you have, the tract will actually be maintained and owned by the development or by the association, but the rights to use that particular piece of land will be that's what you're buying. You're buying that is yours to use, that is yours to.
The rights of control of
Yeah.
that tract.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So how is this different than a condominium plat?
For that, I would maybe defer to, well, when I think of a traditional condominium, you have all the land held in common, and you have buildings. And the person who owns a condo in one of the buildings, in that case, actually owns from the paint, the interior paint in, typically with the Wisconsin condo law. The building itself, when you think of the structure, the 2x4s, the siding, the roof, all that is held in common, as part of the
Okay,
condo.
I happen to be a building inspector. I deal with a number of condominium properties.
Okay.
And basically, what you're describing here is very similar to two condominium projects I'm working with right now, which is commonly owned property. You buy the rights to a portion of your land that you have control over certain aspects of it. So, but that is a condominium ownership. How is it not the same thing?
We would call it a condominium.
You would call it a
Yeah.
condominium as well. I mean, classically in Northern Door, we recognize the condominium as what you were just describing before.
Right.
Larger building with multiple units inside the building.
Yeah.
Okay. There has been a suggestion that the individual lots would be rentable to the point where even the RV pads could be rentable, as the owner of the lot could rent the pad out to some individual other than the owner of the actual occupant of the house.
The way this will be structured, first off, any rental activity of any sort has to pass through the front desk, meaning they have to register, they have to pay at the front desk. It's fully controlled by the front desk. They're at that point given the rules and regs, and their unit is inspected, make sure it's up to the standard, to the community standard. So in that regard, it's fully regulated, and there's no Airbnb or any of those kinds of things. If somebody wants to rent, we will not allow, as is common in other places, you cannot rent a motor coach. If you want to rent a motor coach, you got to go to some dealer or some big place that, you know what I'm saying? It isn't like the individual owner can rent their motor coach. Can they rent their home? Yes. It's relatively uncommon. A lot of people don't like to do that in this particular market, but they can, yes. And if that's the case, assuming that the owners are not there and that their motor coach is not there, of course, people will be able to pull their motor coach in, rent the home, or maybe even pull it into the site and not rent the home. Again, that'll be up to the situation at hand. Also, I'd like to point out that you don't need to own a motor coach to own one of these places. If you like a nice development in a nice place with a nice view, you can just buy a house there, even if you've never owned a motor coach and don't plan on it. So I did want to make sure that that's understood as well.
Okay. Some of the questions that were asked and some of the answers have been that we would restrict these things. One example was no firewood-based fire pits, right?
Right.
How is that controlled? How do you intend to make the owners follow that rule? Is that a
Really,
covenants or?
Yeah, oh, that way, right, yeah,
Okay.
that'll be in the covenants, right.
So I'm not aware of any covenants that are locked in stone. In other words, any majority of the homeownership, can vote on it and change any part of the covenants. Is that?
There's two sort of levels of changes. There's bylaws and there's rules. And in, again, Wisconsin condo law, the bylaws have to be approved, a bylaw change rather, has to be approved by 100% of the ownership. Essentially impossible. A rules change has to be approved by 75% of the ownership. Difficult, but not impossible. I guess as a condition, some of these things can be placed into the bylaws that would ensure the 100% vote required, as opposed to rules, which, would require, again, hard to get 75%, but a lot easier than 100. So things like that are very important to the community, we could put into that category, I believe. I am not an attorney, but I've had a fair amount of experience with this stuff, so.
One thing too, Mariah, you may want to elaborate, but certainly if they would do an activity that is contrary to the conditional use permit received, then the county would have jurisdiction to call their conditional use permit void and have them correct that error.
Correct. So the county can't enforce your bylaws, but if there are conditions that the Resource Planning Committee wants to set about whatever it is, whatever topic it is, and then you put those in your bylaws, then, yeah, I mean, we would enforce the conditions.
Well, my only comment in reference to that would be that some of the items brought up as restrictive, as reasonings to try to keep it as a certain pattern, a design of activities in the property that are good and make sense to do, that feel good towards us, I don't think is something that we could technically put as a condition on the conditional use. So that's why I was asking that kind of a question.
Right, and one thought I had on that is certain things, if it makes sense to make a condition, certainly make a condition. If it's something you want in the bylaws, which is a little bit beyond the scope typically, we certainly we'd be fine with you saying county staff, Mariah or Sue, must approve, or Grant must approve our language in this section of our bylaws, or however you want to do that to try to protect that from happening.
Sue also just reminded me that with each conditional use permit that's issued, we record an affidavit at the Register of Deeds that lists all the conditions related to that project. So yeah, it's public record.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Another question I have for you is your road width inside the condominium atmosphere there. What are the road widths that you have designed for that as far as width?
I've got 24 feet of road, curb and gutter on both sides.
Okay. In regards to large firefighting apparatuses, they don't seem to get any smaller these days. They're always getting bigger. Is there enough room for them to pass by each other? And as far as a turnaround someplace in there other than the whole drive area itself, if they go to a dry hydrant, multiple trucks are going to come in and work off of that dry hydrant.
So, yes, 24 feet, so a standard, for example, Bay Shore Drive is 11 feet from the paint line to the center line. So these will be 12 feet of asphalt in our roads. We did the radius turns on the cul-de-sac by the storage units, and that's where the trucks would come up and line up to fill up, and then they would continue out. So I think we've got that covered.
And then one question for your, I guess, the driveway coming into, the roadway coming, it shouldn't be a driveway, it's a roadway coming into your units up there. Is there as you have it designed, and I'm not able to depict here from the photographs, is there a drop-off off of that roadway going up into it at all that we need to be concerned about cars sliding off the edge?
No, the roadway is gonna be tucked into where the property goes up right now, so you're gonna go in, and we're actually gonna be excavating, so as you drive up, you're gonna have an exposed limestone face perhaps on your right side as you drive up, because we're taking out grade there, which in turn is lowering our grade from existing grade. So the grade on the other side of the street isn't just a sheer fall off. We're gonna be cutting this entire stretch in from 50 feet off the road all the way up to, daylight at the top. So you're gonna be basically driving through a cutout area.
Thank you.
Sure.
The main driveway does not have provisions for pedestrian traffic, correct?
Right, it's just the normal pavement.
Okay. The George Penny Park is not exactly an uncommon park, and people just go there routinely. It's packed all the time. So why don't you have provisions for pedestrian traffic? I find it difficult to believe that volume of individuals that close to the water would not be interested in going down to it.
Right, so there is a secondary access with an easement right now that leads to the east parking lot that'll run up through our pickleball court area and have access to the subdivision. So we anticipate, that would be a fairly common walkway, and then they'd have the crosswalk that's designated right there that everybody from this parking lot already uses to cross the road. So we picture 90% of, if they want to walk to the park, they're going to walk by the pickleball courts, walk down that existing gravel driveway, and end up walking across that crosswalk.
That was difficult to see on this.
Right. Sorry.
In those same regards, Pete, when it comes to handicapped individuals, they like to go camping, they like their high-end class motorhomes. Some of them use walkers, some of them use wheelchairs, and is that only roadway the only access for them to, I guess if they want to take a walk or a stroll, is that the only access they have?
Right.
Is
So you'd
the
have
roadway?
Right, you'd have a steeper access up to the pickleball courts, like we just talked about, which would be more of a pedestrian trail, or you would have the main drag up in. Again, we have over a mile of road in our subdivision, as you might call it. So if somebody is going to take a walk, these slopes are all very gradual throughout here. It's all approximately 1% slope on our roads, so it's going to be a very flat roadway up on the plateau of the thing. So we'd anticipate most people would simply walk the loop if they want to take a stroll. If they have interest in fishing, obviously, they'd come down to but you're going to have the same sunset up here as if you walk down here.
Well, I'm thinking of the eventuality, the unknowns that, people do stroll, they do leave or want to leave the complex, and if they have to use that road as a main thoroughfare for foot traffic, wheelchair traffic, walker traffic, call me crazy, whatever, I've done law enforcement for 30 years, I've seen every realm there is out there. Is there any way to design a foot traffic path along the road? Right.
Typically, the safest way to do it is to put a sidewalk on the back side of the curb and gutter, obviously, but I have been involved in projects where that isn't feasible, or not practical, and they widen the road and put a painted 30-inch wide stripe down the side, and that's your access point. Again, to do that in the area of our main entrance, I think that would relatively not be used. I think if somebody is going to walk to the park, they're certainly going through the pickleball area to do that. I think that may be a waste. Our road is wider than 24, and where we had to get our radiuses for the fire trucks, we widen out on the curves and we widen out there. Maybe the provision is you do a flat area 5 feet off behind the curb that ends up being lawn, so at least somebody has a way to step off of the curb if they would happen to be walking on our main entrance.
Thank you.
Okay, Vinnie?
If you can maybe go to one of the individual sites. I just have a question about the impervious surface. What?
Page 25.
Thank you, page 25. On the hearth side and some of the renderings I saw, there were outdoor kitchens, pergolas, areas that had pavers, which may be pervious or impervious. If you could just explain how you're going to manage that over a 10-year period with individual owners who may or may not want more impervious area. Because you mentioned the value of a project was, you could say some people have the advantage of having a pervious paver that water can move through, but you're not wanting to do that because of the groundwater, as you mentioned. So how are you planning to balance that out?
Sure, and the practical answer is that if somebody's gonna do something, they're gonna need approval from the homeowners association. You can't put up a 6-story pergola in a whatever. So there's gonna be controls. There's gonna be a limit to the hard surface on each lot, so nobody can pave their entire lot. So those will be implemented into the restrictions. Again, I think a lot of these, as, you know, some of these will be built early on by the developers as setting the standard of what things are to look like, what the options are for your outdoor patio and your outdoor kitchen, things like that. So what we have shown on the plan here certainly identifies areas. If somebody decides that they'd rather have, you know, a square kitchen instead of this round, we're not holding them to exactly this, but we will have limits on how close to the lot line it can be and what the overall hard surface would be.
I'm assuming the stormwater plan with the DNR would address impervious versus pervious and what's going to the curb and gutter as a whole.
Right,
Okay.
so the whole theory on the stormwater design is that you make sure that the dirty water, which is the pad, the parking area, slopes back to the curb and gutter and goes to the pond. This is considered clean water, it's just rooftops and patios, that would be allowed. If, you know, a lot of our grading, we have as much as we can going right to the ponds. If some of the clean water doesn't reach a pond, that's okay. But the DNR is restricting us to make sure that those get done correctly so the water gets to the pond.
Thank you. While you have this up, and Mariah has this question as well, is number of parking spaces required for a multi-occupancy dwelling and for an RV site, and how those play out, and if those sites are paved, if they're grass, how that works? Thank you.
I can have Sue do all the calculations. The answer to the last part of the question is that in non-core areas, only half of your required parking needs to be surfaced, as long as you have it designated, so half of it can be grass, and I'll let Sue talk about the numbers.
Okay. Overall, what is required is 416 parking stalls. The proposed project has, thank you, 513, so almost 100 more than what is required.
Thank you. And that's a mix of grass and paved.
Correct, and what we did with a multiple occupancy development is, we basically calculated out the parking for a campground and this size campground and a parking for the multiple occupancy development, and then added those together. We are counting one shared space per unit between, because the ordinance does allow for the sharing of uses that overlap on a property.
And it means it's pretty safe to say that there's no street parking allowed, and then there's one parking space if there's an RV there. That's what it looks like on here.
So
One paved parking space, I should say, sorry.
Per the typical site plan, I don't know if you can see my cursor, there's 3 grass parking, 1 RV parking, and then 1 parking behind the RV. When we calculated the requirements for the mod, we assumed all the single-family residences within the whole development were 3-bedroom, and that most likely will not be the case.
Thank you.
So in addition to assuming 3-bedroom, which would be calculating kind of the worst-case scenario for parking, we also didn't take into account garages, and I'm not sure if every home style has a garage, but there would also be that parking as well. So even though we counted some overlap for the multiple occupancy development and the campground, that was based on worst-case scenario build-out and doesn't take into consideration the garages.
And so, sorry, my question with that is then, and I don't know the DNR regulation with this, but if they're requiring you to curb and gutter all of the dirty water, but you have parking spots on the grass, how does that work?
Right, so the main parking of the motor coach obviously would be on a hard surface that would be directed to the curb and gutter. Grass parking, I'm not so sure the DNR regulates that. Again, we'll have an average of 18 inches of filter material. We feel we did our due diligence in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Done?
Yes.
Biz, got more questions?
Yeah. Are you going to have building restrictions on the height, how high up they can go?
Right, right. The way it's set up right now is obviously the ones out near the west side of the project, you don't want to block the views of the ones. So we have the taller buildings back toward the bluff and the the single story out near. So there will be internal restrictions, and then the county has, I believe it's 35 feet would be the rule on the tall ones.
Okay. And then kind of going back to where Mr. Cook was headed on the disabled people and whatnot, it's quite a distance from up there to get down to Penny Park for people to go fishing and whatnot. Would the association allow like golf carts, four-wheelers on the private roads up there? And I know there's restrictions into Cross County B. You know, they're not going to be allowed, but you know people will do that because it'll be a lot more convenient to ride down there than it's going to be to walk.
Right. Golf carts, yes. When I was in Petoskey, I saw a golf cart for a resident. That's not uncommon. To go down the pickleball court area through the easement that leads to that asphalt parking lot, you know, we can certainly tell them they can't drive them into the main body of the park, but park here where the parking lot is and walk across. I think we can do some reasonable things to feel good about restricting it if it, you know, so they're not racing up and down Bayshore Drive. I get that.
And you did hit on traffic. I know there was a lot of concern about how much traffic there will be on County B to get to the park, and of course you illustrated that Highway 42 is available. People can go up that way and then drop down. You can't make people do that. If they want to take the more scenic County B, they're going to do it. And I know you said there's other ways to get there, but you know what the public would most often will just take County B, where, you know, because it's a little shorter and it's more scenic to drive down there than it is on the state highway.
Right. So we'll push people toward using an alternate route. We can't force them to do that. The entire philosophy here, though, is if you pull in here with your motor coach and you hook up to the sewer, you hook up to the water, you hook up to the electric, that motor coach doesn't leave again because it's an hour process to get that all cleaned up, packed up, get your awnings down, and you don't take your motor coach anywhere until you're heading out of state again. Certainly the perception of a standard campground where every Sunday people are yanking in and out, and Fridays, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be, hopefully, somebody invests in our community, they move here, they park their motor coach there, they have their house there. That thing sits there for 3 months, 6 months, and they enjoy Door County. So I think some of the motor coach traffic is certainly overestimated.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one related to that, thank you, I don't know the best way you can answer this, but as far as number of rentals, does someone have to purchase a site and then they rent it, or are you operating a business that rents sites by the weekend, by the week, by the month?
Right, they would have to purchase. It would be owner to say, I'm putting my house in the rental pool at the management association and say, okay, these 20 said they would be okay renting their home, and somebody else would pull their motor coach in, stay for a month, use their home, or a week, or whatever. But yeah, no, it's not gonna be geared toward, let's pick up transient people with motor coaches to come up for 2 days. It's gonna be more of a residential type deal.
Okay, so I understand that, but I'm wondering if, again, worst case scenario, because that's kind of what we're basing our decisions on as well, is every single site becomes a rental. The owner decides to spend 2 weeks in Door County, and then they rent out every day or every weekend or by the week. Is there a limit? And then did you do your traffic calculation based on whatever you said as the limit, as the minimum rental?
Right, I didn't do the traffic calculation. We hired that to Robert E. Lee.
Yes, yeah.
I know they had factors in there for that, but again, you know, the bottom line on the traffic is, even if you take worst case scenario and 300 trips a day and they all go in one direction, we're at a quarter of the capacity of Bayshore Drive. So to argue that, you know, I guess what's the answer? If we're at a quarter of the capacity of Bayshore Drive, I don't see that. That's not the intention. The intention is you buy your unit, you rent it occasionally. I think in Petoskey they said maybe 20% are in the rental pool. the houses?
It's very, it's around 10%.
10%? Yeah, we had that conversation with the gentleman who manages that one in Petoskey today to ask him that question, you know, what do you see? And he said, hardly anybody.
Go ahead, Biz.
Well, to just expand a little more on that, we're dealing right now, and maybe there will have to be restrictions made in Door County on the vacation rental thing. And I'll tell you why. Because if you have a 2-bedroom, you only need a 750-gallon tank. If it's a 3-bedroom, you need a 1,000-gallon tank. But what's happening is people are getting these amounts of money that are so high, a couple $1,000s a week, and then they'll put 3 couples in there with all their kids. So your 2.5-bedroom and your capacity on water going to your holding tank, if this continues the way it's going in Door County with vacation renting, and I'm not saying many of the people in your park maybe won't do that, but it's a way of not only paying their taxes and paying all their bills, but making money if they vacation rent it out. And that can get out of hand, and it is starting to get out of hand in Door County. And not only the traffic problem with the cars, because you know, if you have 3 couples, well, then you got 3 cars, and then their children, and they'll pay all this money because it's all divided up, you know, between these couples.
Right, and again, these are a 1,200 square foot maximum footprint. You know, we can put whatever rules in our covenants. This has to remain very upscale, retirement age, seasonal tourists. You know, to get into a package with a motor coach, it's not your common person. There's rarely younger people that own these just because they're so expensive. We feel the demographic isn't going to support. If you can afford $1 million motor coach and want to do this and have all this money invested here, I doubt if you're going to want to jockey short-term rentals and worry about somebody wrecking your couch.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? So you do have something in the bylaw regulations proposed between pages, well, item 28 in the bylaw regulations proposed in your packet has a maximum dwelling unit rental capacity of 6 people for 2-bedroom units and 8 people for 3-bedroom units. So is that definitely what you're proposing? Because that seems to go along with Biz's question about capacity and
Right.
and traffic and wells and septics and everything
Right,
else.
and that's what Tom had put in there based on trying to come up with a list of covenant restrictions, so, yes.
Vinnie?
I just have a clarification on the number. Does that include the building as well as the RV, or just the building?
They cannot just rent an RV, motor coach from you. If you bring a motor coach, you'd still be limited on those bedrooms. So if you have a 2-bedroom house, you can have 4 people, even if you bring a motor coach, is my understanding.
Oh, I don't think that's how it's worded.
That's not
Maybe
how it's
maybe
worded?
my notes are wrong, but I made a note that the 6 people for 2-bedroom units and 8 people for 3-bedroom didn't include the RV, but maybe I didn't understand that that was included.
No, I'm sorry, Mariah, you are correct. The motor
It's-
coach, I mean, if whoever comes in their motor coach is gonna be staying in their.
Okay, so if someone's gonna rent a site, they have to rent both the house and the RV, whether or not they have an RV or whether or not.
They cannot
so-
rent an RV.
No, right.
They bring their own
Right,
RV.
they bring their, okay, if someone's gonna rent, they have to rent the RV pad and the house. And then that 6-person limit is just for the house, and the 8-person limit is just for the bedrooms, plus whoever has the RV?
Yeah, the limit, I thought we had.
I think there's a,
Yeah, I thought we had a limit in the RV, but if we don't, the limit in the RV would be 4. And again, highly unlikely, but. Or was it 2? I'm sorry. 2, yeah, 2 in the RV. Well, if the RV has 2 bedrooms and 2 baths.
I'll try and find the exact wording.
Yeah,
And Sue tried to do the math calculations for the water, if anybody wants to hear those, but you might need to repeat the numbers back to make sure we did it right.
Okay, Biz, go ahead.
The only problem I see with that, it's going to be very, very difficult to enforce. I mean, let's face it, you know, the public can do stuff, and it's going to be very hard to enforce stuff like that.
Right, and I agree. Certainly, this development is gonna fall under the same scrutiny as anybody on top of the hill who decides to do the same thing. You know, this has a management company involved, it's a little bit different. I think we have better control over it. Sue?
Okay, so I had 601,000 cubic feet in the first pond, 138,000 in the second, and 69,000 cubic feet in the third, totaling 819,000 cubic feet.
Right, and then you multiply that by 7.5?
And it turns out to be about 6 million gallons.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
They're big, they're very big ponds. We have almost 4 acres of ponds, so.
I found the rental item, and so this is in your application packet on page 348 and number 28. This is the list of things that I think you said that you were going to replicate from Petoskey or other areas. No more than 6 people may occupy a 2-bedroom unit, and no more than 8 people may occupy a 3-bedroom unit when it is being rented. So I guess I didn't know or understand how the RV
Sure, and-
capacity would play into or on top of that.
Those rules that are up there will be put in place, but that is not a complete list either. So we can, these are things we could add, we could put a limit on the number of people in the RV.
Okay, so the
If it's not- if
RV
it's not
capacity
mentioned-
would be on top of that?
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, go ahead, John.
This would be regarding the gallon figure that we just talked about. What happens if there's no rain, which is not predicted, we're predicted to have more rain. What happens if there's no rain? Are we filling those ponds then with the
Right.
high-capacity wells?
Typically, what you would do is you would fill them at night when there isn't other use. That's not unheard of. I'm not gonna say they never need to be filled. They're obviously not spring-fed, and if we have a 6-month drought. The good news is, we have, every time it would rain, you'll get all the road water there. It's gonna have an impact. They're large ponds. Again, we're a little bit at the mercy of the DNR code on, we have to meet 80% suspended solids removal and peak flow management, so every project this size is gonna have a sizable pond. I don't know how to answer that any better.
Well, I realize the ponds would be there. I guess my question is, what are we doing to the aquifer of 6 million gallons if we have to feed it from the well only until we get such, I guess, Mother Nature to help us fill those ponds? Are we jeopardizing that aquifer down there to fill 6 million gallons?
I could shed some light onto it, onto this. I also, at North Haven, I developed it, but I also manage a lot of the grounds work and a lot of the things that occur there to this day. The ponds at North Haven are very similar to this, actually, and they're not much smaller. In the last couple of years that it's been wet, we've had a lot of rain. I don't think we've turned our pump filling line on at all. If we have, it's been very, very little. In years that it has been very dry, sometimes we do need to put additional water in. Same situation, you know, I mean, in that case, we have a different well, but we've never had any aquifer issues or anything like that. We have one well that runs our swimming pools and our recreation areas and all those kinds of things, and it fills the pond. But again, it's seldom, once it's full, it's seldom. To fill the pond the very first time, again, that pond would be going in early on. The demands for water in the rest of the development at that point will be pretty much non-existent. So we would slowly, we'd adjust the gallons per minute, and we'd slowly fill the pond, you know, over time, so that we're not pulling that. The replenishment rate of the aquifer would exceed or certainly match up easily with what we're pulling out.
How many gallons did you end up with there, Sue? 6 million. All right, so we ran the research on the Horseshoe Bay irrigation well at the golf course, and they're doing 17,500,000 gallons a year out of that irrigation well. So that'd be approximately almost 3 times what our total pond capacity would be. So again, we're nowhere near those kind of pump rates or gallonage usage, even if we have to add some water to our pond.
Let me see. Okay, John?
If somebody has another question, they can ask, but I got some.
It's related to the water.
Yeah,
we're just
go ahead.
talking about. Can you explain I'm not sure from the drawing if the pool is inside or outside, and then what's your plan for draining it? I know there's some regulations from the DNR for that, but are you planning to drain it into the ponds or onto the ground, or?
Right, the pool is outdoor as shown. Tom, you talk about how you're gonna maintain the pool?
Right now, the DNR, you can go to the YMCA in Fish Creek. In fact, they actually built a little berm to contain the water that they pump out when they need to drain the pool. Usually from a maintenance standpoint, well, in this case, it'll be an outdoor pool. So you bring the water down below the equalizers, which is about 3 feet down from the top, and you leave it for the winter. And then, of course, put it back in the spring. Pool will probably hold, in that particular case, about 55,000 gallons for the outdoor pool, for the pool. That's the only pool in that case. I don't know what else. Where do you drain it? It's chlorinated water. Generally speaking, it would go out onto the grass, actually. It's a very low percentage of chlorine. Again, that's per the DNR. You backwash your filters out onto the grass, that kind of a thing. It's just the way it's done. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you, yeah, thanks.
John?
I'm going to try to ask a karst question. I'm not a geologist, but in relation to the old pit itself, have you done any kind of reports as far as the geology to see if there's any holes or any depressions? I understand, I've been up there probably 800 plus times in my lifetime being in law enforcement. I've dealt with a lot of people up there doing different things. Some of us have grown up,
There never was any, there never was any beer,
I was wearing a badge.
He started out without doing it.
there never was any beer parties up there.
Yeah. I guess my point, I know all the cracks and fissures that are in there, and I know the sides of the walls, but getting back to the geology, have you guys done any studies to say there are no types of holes, depressions, unknown caves?
Right, so,
It's karst.
so where we're at right now is the DNR is requiring us to have a geologist do an inspection of the site. So based on that inspection, they're gonna look for all that, and they're gonna make a recommendation if we have to do any change in our modification to our pond construction plan. And then a geology report has to be approved by the DNR geologist, and that's how we're gonna move along with that. We actually did meet on site with a geologist. The unfortunate thing was there was enough snow that it was deemed that it doesn't make sense to look around too much because something could be under snow. So we are waiting for the snow to leave, and we're certainly gonna do our due diligence, and the DNR is gonna require that before they issue us a permit for land disturbance.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One more question. When it comes to doing the drilling for the wells or blasting, and if I looked at your drawings correctly, there was quite a bit of blasting that's got to occur to make your trenches for your lines, your water lines, et cetera. Is that chancing any possibility of damaging that karst area and collapsing into the aquifers? I don't know all of that geology, but I'm going to, I guess I'm leaning more towards the number of wells that are in the area on top the bluff, et cetera. I don't know the depths of those wells and how that aquifer would be affected to the private owners around the area.
Right, so the depth we're talking on the sewer trenches, assuming, or based on the fact that we're filling approximately 18 inches, our water has to be 6 feet down so it doesn't freeze. So we're looking at sewer depths. The pitch actually works out well, that our sewer doesn't have to be extremely deep anywhere. So trench depth, you're probably looking at a maximum of 10 feet or so, and that would include your bedding and your pipe and keeping cover for frost reasons. So 10-foot depth from finished grade, that's probably 8 foot, 8.5 feet from existing grade. So those areas would be limited to be fairly shallow. Again, when you talk about blasting sewer, it's so common in Door County that it's every sewer pipe practically in the city is blasted, and most developments we've worked on, you blast. People on top of the hill with septic tanks likely blasted their tank in and basement, and I live right up there, I did. So it's not uncommon. Yeah, it's a big project and there's a lot of blasting, you know, to say that this one differently than any other one is gonna contaminate a well or cause some kind of problem. You know, again, it's the same escarpment that runs forever, and we're gonna do the same construction methods that have been done throughout the peninsula on the same escarpment, and, you know, I guess history says that the people doing the blasting are professionals and they know what they're doing, and it hasn't caused problems. They're certainly insured, they're gonna carry insurance. We're gonna be very strict. I think we had a $5 million limit on insurance for anybody who is doing that kind of activity on this site.
My guess, my follow-up, do you know the depths of the wells that are in that area?
Yes.
Is that in our report here someplace that I couldn't read the numbers on?
Yeah, I don't have it in my report. I know the opposition did quite a bit of research, and they show well depths on some of those diagrams. Bottom line is, every well, I think, is recent enough in these areas that they're all drilled with 170 feet of casing is the standard in a limestone in Door County. So I think every well is probably drilled 170, and then it varies below how deep the hole went. But yeah, some of that information would be in the opposition's.
Okay, thank you.
Done? Is done?
For now, I'm done.
Done for now.
Thank you.
Done for now. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen and lady. Does anybody need a break?
Yes.
We're gonna take another 5-minute break.